We just got back from Belize and my kids were there writing their names on the back of these stingrays, which is absolutely crazy when you think about it, because why would you do that? And is that even safe to do? Yes, it is safe to do. And why do they do it? I don't know. I think they just saw other kids doing it, so that was cool. Maybe they were bored. Who knows? My kids do a lot of stuff and I have no idea why they do those. There's an island off the mainland of Belize called Key Cocker. And on this island, there's a place that you can go every night at 4 p.m. to feed stingrays. Now, the first night I went out by myself to feed the stingrays. It was such a surreal experience. At first you're like really nervous and really scared to see these stingrays because they have stingers and of course they can sting you, right? They're very dangerous. But as you get to know these stingrays and get to interact with them, they're just there to feed. All they care about is feeding. So there's a couple of instances where I was able to feed these stingrays and it was a really, really cool experience. And the second night I brought my kids out and that's where they started writing their names all over the backs of these stingrays. So they would write different kinds of names, different kinds of expressions, and it was kind of cool to see the stingrays kind of go around, and that one individual stingray, you could now track it because you had your brother or your sister's name on there, and so it's kind of swimming around. Now the stingrays always have sand on their back, which makes it really easy to write your name on the backs of the stingrays. And the tops of them are actually really hard. They kind of have a bony structure on the backs of them, and they're very, very soft and delicate on the wing part of the stingray. So on the tops, you could write your name because it was hard, and on the sides, it was a little bit more difficult because the sides of the stingrays are actually very soft and very comfortable. And the one question I always get asked are you scared of these stingrays stinging you? Most of the stingrays still had their stingers, except for a couple that local fishermen would cut off of the stingrays, and for some reason they thought they could cut off the stingray's tail and then throw it back and the stingray would be okay. So it was really sad to kind of see a couple of these stingrays didn't have their stingers on them, but most of them did. So if you accidentally stepped on these stingrays, you could actually get stung yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of the tourists just kind of treated this just kind of like a zoo mentality or like a Yellowstone mentality where people kind of rush and see their thing and then they leave. Now, the first time my kids saw the stingrays, they were very nervous. They didn't really know how to feed them. They didn't really know what to feed them. They didn't really know what to expect. But after about an hour of interacting with them, they couldn't stand not being with the stingrays. They really, really, really liked interacting with the stingrays and feeding them and watching other people feed them. And there are very few places on this planet that you could actually go and feed stingrays, write your names on their back, and have such a cool time. Now, the feeding time of the stingrays is at 4 o'clock, and it's every single night. This guy brings out this big bucket of bait and he feeds the stingrays. But unfortunately, the birds take note of this, and the pelicans and the seagulls just swarm around this guy. Here you can see a scene of this guy just getting bombarded with all of these birds and these seagulls. And I'm surprised that some of the tourists didn't get dive bombed. You know, when the birds have to go to the bathroom, they drop a little white texture. I'm surprised that people just didn't get lit up with white paint basically from all these birds, because there were birds everywhere and they were flying really, really low. Some really, really cool sea life was out there. Anyways, the guy would bring out this bucket of bait and the guy would kind of shuffle his way out there, and the stingrays would come up to his feet and just basically like encircle him. And there were stingrays all over the place. There were probably 30 to 40 different stingrays that were in this area. And as soon as the feeding starts at 4, maybe 4:30 some nights, it just was madness. There were seagulls everywhere and pelicans everywhere, tourists everywhere. And they try to keep the tourists back so that the people wouldn't get stuck out there, because once you're out there in the water, maybe you're like a foot or two deep in the water, they'll circle all the way around you. So you have to be very, very careful that you don't step on them. And yes, these stingrays still have stingers and they can sting you, which made me a little bit nervous to have my kids be out there all alone unattended. But after about an hour or so, my kids were very, very used to the stingray. They really enjoyed it, and they actually felt very comfortable with them and comfortable with the guy that was giving out the bait and the other tourists and the seagulls and the pelicans. It ended up being like a really cool place that we went night after night after night. So that was such a cool experience for my family to get to experience, because where else in the world can you experience something like this with your kids, especially the age that they are? I just want to spend as much time with them as I can, and that's why we devoted this last year to travel as much as possible with our kids and let them do experiences like this. I remember as a kid feeding stingrays in Stingray City and the Grand Cayman Islands, and that was so cool for me. I'm so glad that I'm able to provide this experience for my kids. Now, feeding stingrays wasn't the only thing we were able to do. On this island, there's also a place that you can feed Atlantic tarpon. There's nothing else like feeding a 6-foot long, giant 100-pound tarpon that leaps out of the air. Here's some incredible footage that we got both in real time and in slow motion of these tarpon just jumping out of the air. This was one of the most exciting experiences. Again, it was only like a quarter mile from the place that we fed the stingrays. So we got in our golf cart and we drove about a quarter mile to the tarpon feeding dock. So for $5 Belizean, which turns out to be about $2.50 US, you can buy, there's like 6 or 7 of these little sardines that you can feed, and you walk up to the dock, you hold it up about a certain amount away from the water, and those tarpon will kind of circle around, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one will just jump up and grab it out of your hand, which is a really cool experience. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because you don't know which one is going to jump up and you don't know how big it is. Look how big this tarpon was that almost ate my daughter's hand. It came up and my daughter's hand went completely inside of it. She had a mark on her wrist where the tarpon bit her hand. Now, tarpon don't actually have teeth, so it didn't actually bite her, but it actually grabbed her hand and she had a little mark on her wrist that she reminded me for the next 2 weeks that she got bit by the tarpon. They don't actually bite, but my daughter's hand went completely in this tarpon, which was really cool. It was almost comical watching them. There's this one like younger guy that was feeding them, and he was so into it, he didn't know what to expect, and he actually fell over after the tarpon kind of bit it out of his hand. So after the tarpon jumped, the guy like fell over backwards on the dock, which is awesome. And so we're asking some of the locals, like, has anybody fallen into the water? And they said, yes, there was a guy about a month ago who was feeding the tarpon and he actually fell into the water, which is kind of funny. But look, it's a surreal experience. You don't know which one is gonna jump up. You don't know when it's gonna jump up, and you don't know how big it is. Some of these are big and some of these tarpon are just monstrous. I mean, just 80, 100 pounds. They're huge. Some of the tarpon that jumped out are actually way more than my kids did. Because the experience was so nerve-wracking and people's expressions are all over the place and people are yelling and screaming and the tarpon are jumping, it's kind of an explosive event. We decided who could actually be the calmest. So then we played a game called Who Can Be the Calmest and have the least facial expression while you were feeding these tarpon. Okay, ready, go. First up is my son. He's pretty much always stoic and has very little facial expression most of the time, so this should be easy for him. And here comes the tarpon, and there you go. Absolutely stone statue cold. 10 out of 10 for him. All right, next up is my daughter. Let's see if she can stare at the camera and not make any facial expression. Okay, so she made some facial expression. She did pretty good. Let's give her an 8 out of 10. All right, now it's my turn. Can I actually do this? I was pretty confident going into it that I could not make any facial expression and I could just do this in slow motion. And here comes a tarpon and my face is looking pretty good. All right, I think I'll give myself like a 9 out of 10 for that one. I can promise you that my wife is gonna have a really hard time with this because she's really nervous on this dock and she's really nervous feeding these tarpon. So last time she did this on the boat, she just screamed bloody murder and everybody in Belize heard her. I swear the whole country heard her scream last time she did this. So let's see how she does. All right, so we don't know which tarpon is gonna come up, but when it does, it's probably gonna knock her over. Okay, that tarpon absolutely just knocked her over back onto the dock. I'm glad she didn't fall off of it, but that was pretty funny to watch her. We're gonna give her a 2 out of 10 for stoicness on that. She could not hold a straight face. In case you're wondering what this is an old fishing pole that they use to get rid of the pelicans, because when you start feeding these fish, the pelicans, honestly, they come over and they're really curious and they're hungry. They end up stealing a lot of food from people's hands and from the water. And so these are like pelican sticks. They're old fishing rods that they just take apart and they just use to kind of bat away the pelicans. So it's pretty comical because you had one person like batting away the pelicans and then you had these other people feeding the tarpon and you had another person on the dock like trying to capture the video in slow motion. It was pretty cool to actually see. It was kind of like a team event and you had people that you didn't even know. You were helping keep the pelicans away from there. It actually ended up being pretty comical. Now, if you've never been to Key Cocker, the only way to get around is by golf cart. You have to rent a golf cart or walk or ride a bicycle because there's no other way to get around on the island. And it was really cool because I might have let my kids learn to drive the golf carts on the back roads a couple of times. And that was an experience in itself. They were terrible. And there's potholes everywhere and it's raining. And we had some fun times doing that. Key Cocker in Belize has no roads. There's no paved roads. And the only way to get around is a golf cart because there are no cars on the entire island, which is kind of cool, but kind of cool to live the island life driving around in the golf carts. Now, this was the last event that we did before we left the island, and there's only 2 ways to leave the island. Now, one is to take a water taxi back to Belize City so that you can fly out of the international airport. The other is to take a little airplane at a little airport. So that's what we chose to do to fly off this airline. It was like a 15-minute flight. It was really, really quick, really short, but these planes are tiny and they make me a little bit nervous, to be honest with you, because there was a little runway, a little tiny plane that just had one little propeller on it, and you could feel every little bump when you were in the air. So it was kind of a cool experience, but at the same time, it was a little bit nerve-wracking having my whole family in one little tiny plane. You're just barely off the ground. Any wind or any storms or whatsoever, you would feel like every little bump on these planes, but it was a really cool experience to get to fly from Cape Cocker back to the mainland. So once in Belize City, we were able to get on our other plane and fly back home. So we will miss Belize tremendously. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you have done this before, because many people have done this before me. I just wanted to document it and create a cool video out of this. And if you haven't and you want to know more information about it, I'd love to help you on your travel plans because it is super safe. It is a super fun place to go, and it's somewhere that if you enjoyed watching this video, you can go with your family and do the same just like we did.